Good afternoon, everybody. We are excited to be here. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Steve Nash. Steve Nash is curator of archaeology here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, where he conducts research on tree ring dating of archaeological sites. He has served as curator of the Pompeii, Titanic, and Ben Franklin exhibitions that some of you may have attended. He earned his PhD at the University of Arizona in '97 and attended Grinnell College in Iowa. Prior to coming to Denver, he served as head of collections in anthropology at the Field Museum in Chicago. Bob Loudermilk, who really organized this event for us for Denver Rotary here today, and I had the pleasure and honor of meeting Dr. Steve a couple days ago, and he gave us a personal tour. And the tour of these artifacts that you're seeing, these works of art, is fascinating. But even more incredible are the stories that Dr. Steve is going to relate. A few things that are amazing, not only about carving precious and semi-precious stones and gems, of which all of these are made, is consider most of the time in the Russian tradition, carved figures were very stoic and more military-like and very straight. Dr. Steve's going to go into more of this, but as you see the lifelike characteristics of all of these carvings, you can well appreciate this ain't your grandpa's whittling shop here. Whatever, Konovalenko. And how many remember the name, the password on the way in? I got lots of different versions of words of kind of like that, which is interesting. But it's our honor really to welcome Dr. Steve to address us on this fabulous and unique exhibit. So give Dr. Steve a big round of welcome for the exhibit.
All right, gang. It's always fun to speak after a luncheon because the challenge is, who am I going to put to sleep and who's going to be visible falling asleep after a luncheon and after a good meal. So anyway, that's my challenge, is to keep you guys awake. Mesa Verde tree ring dating, French Paleolithic art, history of museums. Any of that have anything to do with Russian gem carvings? Absolutely not. But to quote our good friend Humphrey Bogart, of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, and Konovalenko walks into mine. The Denver Museum, as we'll see in the next few minutes, is home to the world's best collection of carvings by Vasily Konovalenko. And we just came back from Moscow about a month ago, and we kept saying Konovalenko, and everybody would twist their heads. And they say Konovalenka. So there's language barriers, there's a whole bunch of different things going on here. But we're in the final stages of getting high quality photographs on every single Konovalenko sculpture in the world, and then we're going to publish the first English language book on this fabulous collection, which has been here in Denver for 30 years. All right, so today what I want to do is go over Konovalenko's history, just a chronicle of who he is and what he did. What's fascinating about this story is not just his artistic talent, but the fact that this story is full of Cold War intrigue and love, and life imitates art. Hollywood could not have written a better script for the Konovalenko collections. We're going to look in detail at some photographs of the sculptures that are upstairs, and then we're going to look closely at some of the faces. We're all primates. We don't learn about each other by smelling each other like canines do. We learn by looking at each other's faces. And what's remarkable about Konovalenko is that he was able to carve faces, expressive faces, theatrical faces, out of gemstones. And nobody in the world has been as good as he has been. He died in 1989, unfortunately, so we don't know what untapped potential there was, but he's undeniably the best. Then we're also going to look at details of the hands and feet for reasons that I'll get into. So Konovalenko was born in the Ukraine in 1929, went to college during World War II in Donetsk in the Ukraine. He was an architecture and theater major, and so after graduating from college, he got a job at the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg. Any of you all been to St. Petersburg here? A couple of you, yeah. A few of you, good. The Mariinsky Theater is one of the premier theaters in Russia, and it shows ballets and operas of various kinds. In 1957, they put on a production of The Stone Flower, and if you belong to Netflix, I encourage you, go to Netflix and get The Stone Flower. You can get a DVD of the ballet, and it's fascinating. because the main leads, the male and the female, look to American eyes, at least my American eyes, as quintessentially Russian people. And what Konovalenko's job for the ballet was to make a box out of malachite. This is malachite here. So the story in the Stone Flower is that Danila, this guy, is a stone cutter. He's a gem carver. He's engaged to be married to his girlfriend, but in the process of making this malachite box, he falls in love with the mythical mistress of Malachite Mountain. And it turns into this love triangle, and ultimately he marries his betrothed, and they live happily ever after. The mistress of Malachite Mountain is cast aside. But in the process of making this box for that set in 1957, Vasily Konovalenko fell in love with the art of gem carving. Life imitates art. Boom, it's right there. So in 1973, from 1957 to 1973, Konovalenko keeps practicing this art, getting better and better and better. And by 1973, he has 13 or so of these sculptures finished. And people are saying, Vasily, you're great. We got to do something with this. So there's an exhibit at the Russian State Museum in St. Petersburg. 25,000 copies of the exhibit catalog sold out in 3 days. Everybody was claiming that Konovalenko is the next Fabergé. He's a national hero and all this, except for one Communist Party apparatchik, who was a guy who was in a position of power, but he wasn't getting any of the credit for this exhibition. So you know what he did? He called up his friends at the KGB and said, investigate Vasily Konovalenko as a state criminal, as an enemy of the state. Why? 3 charges that went up against Konovalenko. Number 1, that he was trafficking in precious and semi-precious stones. Guilty as charged. That was illegal in the former Soviet Union. Number 2, he was possessing gold and silver. That was illegal in the former Soviet Union too. Guilty as charged. Number 3, he was making fun of the Soviet people, which was also a crime in the former Soviet Union. Now, we'll discuss that one later on. I asked the artist's wife what was the most serious charge that he faced, and it was the one of possessing gold and silver. It was minuscule amounts of gold and silver, but it was still a crime against the state. So what the state did was said, okay, Mr. Konovalenko, your options are few. You can donate your sculptures to the State Gems Museum in Moscow, and we'll set you up with a shop and raw materials where you will continue producing your works for the state, or you're going to the Gulag. What would you do? Start working for the state. The other thing I wanted to mention about the KGB, they interviewed 1,500 of Konovalenko's friends and associates in that investigation. Now, this guy's an artist. 1,500 people seems like an excessive expenditure of resources. And I mean, can you name 1,500 of your friends and associates that the FBI would do well to interview? I certainly can't. Anyway, the other thing that happened at that exhibition in 1973 is that Armand Hammer, the capitalist billionaire, shows up at the exhibition in Leningrad, St. Petersburg at the time. And he sees these sculptures and he falls in love with them. And he says, I'll give you $250,000 cash for each one of those sculptures. Can you imagine the communist reaction to that? Capitalist pigs, cash, right there? No. It complicated the whole situation. So, from 1973 until 1981, Konovalenko is working for the state. He creates a whole series of sculptures, some of which we've tracked down, most of which are gone. We simply don't know where they are. But his wife was Jewish. And in 1981 was the Jewish emigration. There was a whole series of years of Jewish emigration visas being granted. And they applied under her Jewish religious status, and a visa showed up. And within 48 hours, Vasily was on a flight to Rome. The family followed within 48 hours, and he gets to Rome, and they say, where do you want to go, Israel or the United States? And he said, I don't know. And they said, don't be a dummy. Go to the United States. From there, you can go anywhere you want. But if you go to Israel, your options are limited. So the family heads to the United States and gets set up by Jack Ortman, a diamond dealer, with a shop in White Plains, New York, and that was where he did his work from 1981 to 1989. Now, 20 sculptures were purchased by a trustee of the museum, Alvin Cohen, back in the early 1980s. They were commissioned for Cohen, and he purchased them. And then he made them available to the museum. Now, the exhibition was supposed to open up in early September 1983. Anybody remember Korean Airlines Flight 007? Shot down over the Kamchatka Peninsula on September 1st, 1983. You know what happened as a result of that crash? Ronald Reagan made GPS available for civilian purposes. That 747 was still being navigated by hand. And 2 of the radar relay stations up in the Aleutian Islands that were supposed to help guide it were offline for maintenance. So it ended up flying over the Kamchatka Peninsula, and then it ended up over the Russian mainland, and that's when they shot it down. How can the Denver Museum of Natural History, as it was known at the time, put on an exhibit of exquisite Russian gem carvings a week after the Russians have just shot down a 747? The 747 there were 2 flights actually, there were sister flights. The second one had a US Senator on it. Can you imagine if a US Senator had died in that? It was the second most tense moment of the entire Cold War after the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. So the show gets delayed. It opens up March 15th, 1984, almost 30 years ago, and then Konovalenko dies. When I got to the museum in 2006, I didn't know anything about the Konovalenkos. They're curated by the Earth Sciences Department. Excuse me. By that rationale, all of the stone tools in the archaeology department should be curated by Earth Sciences. This is not Earth Science stuff. This is art. This is anthropology. So I started trying to lay claim to it, and for 4 years, we've been gathering high-quality digital images of these things. We went to Vienna a year and a half ago. We went to Moscow a few months ago, and then the book will be finished here shortly. What I want to do is spend the rest of the time showing you details of the photographs. By the way, I forgot to pass this around. This is a piece of nephrite, or I'm sorry, it's malachite, so you can take a look at some of the raw material that Konovalenko was working with. He uses all kinds of different raw materials to make these sculptures. And I'm going to pass around a piece of obsidian on the other side. Obsidian is volcanic glass out of which human populations have made arrowheads for a very, very long time. This stuff, when you fracture it, has edges that are sharper than scalpels. There's a notable archaeologist that had double bypass surgery. He made the scalpels for his own surgery out of obsidian. Be very, very careful when you handle this. But Konovalenko was so talented that he turned these into shoes, as we'll see. He turned obsidian into shoes. Something that breaks like glass, and he curves carved surfaces on it. So what are some of the sculptures that we've got upstairs? And by the way, after this presentation, you can go upstairs and enjoy them on your own. This is called Bosom Pals. It's one of Konovalenko's favorite themes. It's 3 guys out for a night of drinking, having a good time. There's a balalaika, some enamel work, and so on, and they're singing their songs. These are best friends. Here's the only sculpture that has a Colorado theme to it. It's on loan right now to the Colorado School of Mines, but this one has 2 guys that are gold prospecting. All of the other sculptures have Russian themes to them, and one of the things that I want to do and document in the book is document for American eyes what these sculptures actually mean, and I'll show you how I misinterpreted some of these. But they're incredibly meaningful to Russian and Ukrainian eyes, but not so much to American eyes. Remember the donkey? We're going to come back to the donkey in a little bit. Oh, what's going on here? Steam bath, a sauna. The old man whose face up there, he's modeled after a New York City policeman that Konovalenko knew. Look at the big guy on the bottom who's enjoying the rub down. The thing about Konovalenko's sculptures is that they're meant to be seen from all 3 sides, which means that they're really, really hard to display, because you have to be able to see them from the top, from the sides, from the bottom. But look at the face. I had thought, maybe this guy, the eye was lost because he got soap in his eye or something like that. Mrs. Konovalenko told me that no, this guy was a Russian army officer who lost his eye during the war. We've documented 8 hours of oral history with Mrs. Konovalenko to get all these stories from the artist's wife herself. Check this out. Prisoners. I couldn't figure out when I looked at this why prisoners have access to a saw and do a hatchet. We'll see the hatchet again in a minute. It's a little petrified wood hatchet that's embedded in a piece of wood behind this guy. Why in God's name would you give prisoners weapons? And Mrs. Konovalenko started laughing. She's like, those guys are in Siberia. What are they going to do? They're going to either hack each other to death or not. But weapons don't matter in Siberia, in the Gulag. Look at the targets on their back. What's that for? That's so that if they're running away, you know where to shoot them in the heart. Ouch. Mrs. Konovalenko told me that this image comes straight out of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, and I looked in it, couldn't find the photograph, but I believe her. I mean, it was a seminal volume in Russian history. Here's another one. This is a lady getting a birch bark bath. Look at the man. He's doing everything he can not to look down. Again, a classic Russian scene. You can go to the Russian steam baths here in Colfax and get this kind of treatment done. Look at her face, though. Little teeny tiny face, carved out of stone, out of Bellerette's quartz, and she's beautiful. How do you do that? I don't know. Here's one called Spring. This is my Cindy Crawford one. Notice the beauty mark up there? One of Konovalenko's marks of genius is that he used natural flaws in the stones that he was using to create aspects of the humans that he was depicting that make them even more human. He didn't put the beauty mark on there intentionally. He somehow saw it in the stone and then used it to make this person seem even more human. We also have diagrams of this one, what it looked like when he designed it. And this guy was supposed to be sitting on a stool made out of petrified wood. And he hadn't yet finished it, and he's walking through his laboratory one day, and he looks over and he sees this piece of amethyst. And he's like, dang, there's a bush that this guy can be sitting on. So the sketch, the plan, has a stool, but then the amethyst. He's taking advantage of the raw materials and looking into them and seeing things that we couldn't see. Note how big the hands are, however. We're going to talk about hands in a minute. They're almost as big as that dude's head. Here's another classic Russian scene. She's drinking tea out of a samovar. He took a piece of agate to make the tea. It looks like she's just put some cream in there. You know how coffee will sometimes segregate like that? Fascinating. This is called rutile quartz. It's got natural strands through it. It looks like a beautiful head of hair, doesn't it? Enamel work. This is where overachievers start going way over the top. He's got some pieces of enamel work like this that are just absolutely insane. And you want to say to somebody like that is like, you know, wasn't that good enough? And no, he kept going. He kept going. The painter. Notice the piece of agate on the bottom and the ripple marks emanating off of the agate. It looks like it's either a piece of canvas on the floor that's getting curled up, or perhaps there's some liquid there. This is modeled after an old man that painted Konovalenko's apartment in St. Petersburg in 1962. Konovalenko left him with a bunch of paint, didn't realize the guy had a bottle of vodka with him, left him at 9 in the morning, comes back at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the guy is completely schnockered but completely proud of the paint job that he did. What's interesting about this is that Konovalenko used flaws in the stone to make it look like the guy had sort of painted himself while he was in the process of painting his house. Absolutely amazing. Look at the hand, the detail on the hand. Anybody who's ever rolled their ceiling ends up looking like that. Sheer genius. How about the, this is called Hunter on the, this is called Swan Song. And I thought that this guy had just shot this swan, and he was calling out to his friends and saying that's where the other swans are. And I asked Mrs. Konovalenko about it, and she said, no, don't be such an idiot, Steve. This is about black swans. They mate for life. And this guy shot the first one, but he's sad because the mate is flying away. I wouldn't have known that. How about the Wanderer? Check this dude out. I thought he was a homeless guy to American eyes. And no, yeah, he's sort of homeless, but more importantly, he's a member of the Old Believers sect, which is common in Russia. They believe in the Father and the Son, but not the Holy Ghost. Hence the hand signal. Oh, note the hand up there. We're going to come back to that hand in a few minutes as well. So you can see this guy, it's not quite tatters. He's just made a decision to live a rustic life. It's not that he's homeless at all. He's just made a conscious decision to do something else. All right, I mentioned the faces. I want to look at some of them in detail. Here's the one modeled after the New York City cop. Take note of the eyes, because not in Spring, but in this one and some of the others, there are actually 3 different gemstones used to model those eyes. Human eyes have 3 different parts. Goodness gracious, what an overachiever. Look at her eyes. Absolutely beautiful. He used the flaws in the stone on this guy to give him sort of a 5 o'clock shadow look. Ah, the prisoners. Remember those guys? All right, they're outside working. What's up with this young prisoner? Is he just too stupid to realize that he's in the gulag? No, I think he's happy to be outside doing something. He's young and vigorous. The flaws in this stone look like a 5 o'clock shadow on him. What about the old guy? He's jaundiced. He's jaded. He's sick of being in prison. He might as well be happy or dead. But look at the expressiveness in these 2 things. Carved out of gem. Fabergé did great gem carvings, but it's stoic faces. It's people standing there. There's nobody else in the world who's done this. Her eyes, faceted sapphires. Look at the tongue, the teeth. How many of you have ever had a little too much vodka in one gulp? Come on now, everybody. Don't your eyes cross just a wee bit? When you go upstairs, you can't see this view of this sculpture because it's at eye level. We need to reinstall those sculptures and put a dome over them so that you can actually see them. This is the top-down view of this guy, and check it out. The vodka is pooled up inside his mouth. Amazing. Okay, so there are a number of sculptures in private hands here in the United States. This one is here in the Colorado, in the Denver region. It's called Gypsies. This is the best one I think that Konovalenko ever did. It's so busy that you almost can't see it in a view like this. So I'm just going to show you the two faces. The man, look at this. What happens when you take flash photography and somebody's looking straight at you? You get the red eye effect, right? Check out this dude's eye. Konovalenko made his eyes out of gemstones. And yet when Rick Wicker, our photographer, took this photograph with the best equipment possible, it ended up looking like there's depth to that gemstone, to that eye. Holy cannoli, I'd like to think that that's intentional. And then check out his hand. We're going to look at some other hands in a minute. Konovalenko was criticized for making clunky hands. Wait a minute, you see how his technique refined over the years? This hand has got not only the veins, but the proper tendons on it. How do you do that? Gem carving. Check her out. She is awesome. She's given him an earful because they broke the wheel on their wagon. But look at her eye. 3 different stones used for it. I love that. I want this to be the cover of the book, actually. She is just so expressive. Donkey. So this is the donkey from the only one that had the Colorado theme to it. And when Alvin Cohen, the trustee who was sponsoring these things, saw the 2 gold miners standing there, he said, "Oh, Vasily, man, this thing isn't done. It needs something else." And, can you imagine the audacity of telling, an artist like this that he's not done? Hey, Rembrandt, you ain't done yet. Michelangelo, Sistine Chapel is not done yet. Well, Alvin was commissioning him. It was right. And so he said, you need a burro in with the gold prospectors. I have half a mind that the expression on this donkey's face is directed at Alvin Cohen. I ain't going to tell his wife that. But look at the teeth on that thing. Look at the tongue. It's exquisite. It's expressive. It's amazing. The black swan, you all probably saw the swan, but you may not have seen the arrow going into its breast, and then the fletching on the arrow. Astonishing attention to detail. Shoes, I'd wear those shoes. They're about 3/8 of an inch long each. Petrified wood and agate. There's the arrows that are held by the guy in the swan. Notice the feathers in the swan. Goodness gracious, he wasn't happy with just a smooth swan. He had to have detail on each and every feather on that thing. The shoes. These are classic peasant slippers in old Russia with the socks, the pants. There's a saw from woodcutters. Here's one of those boots that's made out of obsidian. I can make you an arrowhead out of that obsidian. I wouldn't even try doing something like that. A hatchet. Oh, but what about the fish? There are lots of sculptures that have fish in them. And I said to Mrs. Konovalenko, your husband was so good at what he did, but these fish are terrible. What the heck's going on? I mean, he didn't even bother to make an eye for this poor fish. It's a blind fish from 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or something. What the heck's going on here? Even this one is kind of cool, but it's not that detailed. And she sat back and laughed at me and she said, Steve, for Vasily, fishing was about the process, not the product. So even this is intentional. The poor fish, they're metaphors for what he saw about fishing. It wasn't the product, it wasn't the fish that were important. It was being able to go out and chill. All right, the hands. Konovalenko was criticized for making clunky hands, but he was doing peasants. He was not doing aristocrats. He was sculpting peasants. And peasants oftentimes have big hands. So I think it's an unfair criticism of him. Even if it's fair, I challenge you to go and carve exquisite hands out of gemstone. This is a guy who was digging out by southwestern Colorado in the 1930s, down by Cortez. His name is Shorty Vining, because he's short. But I'm not going to call him Shorty. Look at the size of the forearms and hands on old Shorty Vining. He's been working the fields his entire life. In Russian terms, he's a peasant. So it's okay to have big hands. But let's look at some of the detail. I mean, there are toenails on those toes. It's not right to criticize his hands. This is the Wanderer, the old believer. Look at the two fingers up there. There are fingernails put onto that. There's fingernails on grandmother on the other one. This is exquisite attention to detail. This is the woman in Gypsies. That's her foot. Here's another incredibly detailed hand. This one is in private hands in New York. But you can see the different nails. This guy needs to cut his nails, but there's nails. Again, look at the tendons and the veins on this thing. It's like he took the criticism and then said, all right, I'm not going to let you level that criticism on me anymore. I'm going to get better. So one of the things that we've been doing is getting gem experts in the local area to come in and help us identify the raw materials. Because in point of fact, a bunch of the labels upstairs, about 40% of the labels are misidentified. And one of the reasons for that is that one of the best ways to do mineral identifications is to use the Mohs hardness scale, which requires you to scratch the minerals. We ain't going to do that. So we had a bunch of guys, 6 different guys, come in and look at these things in great detail, and that's going to inform the book that we do. One in Vienna, Hippo. This one, you look at it and you have no idea how big it is, but it's made out of malachite. This is called Konovalenko. This is Bellerette's quartz. The tongue is a ruby. The eyes are diamond. The feet are covered in gold. You think that this thing is this big? That weighs 450 pounds. The reason that our photograph has it like this is that it was too big for us to move. The family had to have this transom, it's in sort of a window well between their living room and their dining room. They had to have that specially built to support that thing. Look at the size of that ruby. It's all one piece. Oh boy, had good suppliers. All right, so the work that I've done with Anna Konovalenko has been to make sure that we get the oral histories down process, to make sure that we understand the creative process, what do they mean when they do their best work. These are just some of the pieces in process that Konovalenko was working on that she had. There she is in their lovely apartment. Remember I said the enamel work was sort of over the top too? That thing is a punch bowl. It's enamel work punch bowl, and each one of those little cups is shaped just like the big chicken, and it has an enamel image of 12 of the sculptures that we have upstairs on the back end of the chickens. So Bosom Pals is on there, and so is Spring and other kinds of things. I mean, this is just over the top levels of time and investment. And then we're looking here at some of the sketches that he had. This is the sketch of gypsies and things. So all of this is going to be incorporated into the book. She wants to do a major traveling exhibition, which we would love to do. Some folks at the Kremlin want to do it. Our challenge is going to be getting this past the highest levels of the Russian and American governments, which are not doing too well relationship-wise right now. There is her daughter, who speaks perfect English and actually lived in New York for a long time with one of the sculptures. There's the son-in-law, who's been instrumental in helping us a great deal. Upstairs, you will see a piece that's on loan. It's called Martin Luther King and Sapphire. And one of Konovalenko's sponsors is Michael Kazanjian, who owns a diamond dealership on Beverly Hills on Rodeo Drive. And I got to go into that diamond dealership and see Martin Luther King and Sapphire. This is the largest black sapphire known to humankind. It was excavated in Western Australia in the 1940s, and the Kazanjian family bought it and had it sitting in their shop for 50 years. And then they learned of a whole series of 4 different presidents that were made out of black sapphires, carved out of black sapphire, and then they said, let's do Martin Luther King out of black sapphire. Who are we going to get to do it? They turned to Konovalenko. Sapphire is corundum. It's the second only to diamond in terms of hardness. So all of a sudden, how'd you like this for a job challenge? A diamond dealer comes to you and says, we have the largest nugget known to humankind. We want you to carve the visage of a known, really important, really famous person out of this stone. You can't make a mistake. But check it out. So this is Martin Luther King and Sapphire. It's upstairs on display at least through September, hopefully longer. They would sell it to us, but the asking price is a little bit out of our league, but in any case, it's on display. But check this out. This is Martin Luther King right out here in City Park. I'd say Konovalenko did a pretty good job. When you're casting in bronze, you can fix your mistakes. When you're whittling away at the second hardest stone known on Earth, there's not much room for error. And I think that's an exquisite piece. So, as I said, we just got back from Moscow. We photographed 24 sculptures at the State Gems Museum. We also got into the reserves of the Diamond Fund in Moscow, which is effectively their Fort Knox. We had Russian colleagues that we met who've been trying to get in there for 10 years. to no avail. We got in there and got to photograph a sculpture called Liquidation of Illiteracy that I'll show you in just a minute. This is another piece that's in Mrs. Konovalenko's hands. If you're interested, if this has turned you on at all, I'm giving an overview of the Moscow trip in a lunchtime lecture right here next Wednesday at 12:15, so feel free to come back for that. But this is the sculpture that had never been photographed before. We knew it existed, but we didn't know what it looked like. And this is a Red Army soldier in the back with a broken arm teaching 3 peasants how to live. How to read and write. This was from Stalin's efforts in the 1920s and 30s to liquidate illiteracy in Russia, in Soviet times. What's interesting about this is that if you've ever seen Russian birch that's so popular in Finland and elsewhere, the furniture here looks just like very, very high-end Russian furniture. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of peasants and high-end Russian furniture. Anyway, lots of thanks, but you guys can read that. I don't need to do anything else except take questions, and thank you very much for your time and attention. Sir?
I can't imagine how all of these different colored pieces of stone went together.
Mm-hmm.
Is there glue or?
So the question was, he couldn't imagine how these stones went together. We got a hold of a video of Konovalenko working in his shop, and some of the material is glued together, some of it is pinned and then glued. But these are surprisingly robust specimens. You can pick them up and move them, and they're not shaking around. But it's glue and it's actually pins. Great. Well, thank you. Oh, sorry. One more. All right. My bad.
When you're working in the second hardest substance known to man, what did you use to carve?
Well, he used diamond bits, diamond drills. So you're using the hardest thing known to humankind to cut the second hardest thing. But,
It's his question.
oh, okay. Yeah, it's diamond drills. Konovalenko used all standard gem carving equipment. So if you go into any lapidary workshop, it's the stuff that they're using. But when you see diamonds that are faceted and other stones that are faceted, those are all straight lines. There's nothing curved. Lisa Konovalenko told me that at one point she shrieked to her parents, "Why can't I just have a normal childhood?" Because the kid's job was to polish some of the stones by hand after the carving had been done. Sorry.
What was the average amount of time he put into each sculpture?
What was the average amount of time that he put into each sculpture? I asked her that as well. I said, when was the sculpture done? She said it was done when he had the image finished in his mind. I asked her how much time. She couldn't say, but she did say that finishing 20 of them in 3 years caused him to have his first heart attack. So the first period in Denver was too much, too fast. He was cranking along. You know, I would guess maybe 2 a year was typical, and then he did 20 in 3 years.
What's the value approximately?
Value approximately, what do you guys think? They've never been sold on the open market. There's one in Colorado Springs. The owner would like to sell it. Christie's and Sotheby's turned him down because they didn't know what the market would be. Well into the 6 figures would be my guess, but it's never been tested. Are all the pieces accounted for? There's one specifically that I know of that nobody knows where it is, and it's called Cosmonaut, and it's an astronaut, a cosmonaut, and it was given to a dignitary, and we don't know where it went. That said, we're going to New York next month, where I thought there was 2 sculptures. It turns out there's 5, so we'll never know total, but I'll have about 75 of them in the book. Why don't we do one more question?
You said we had the largest collection. How did that happen?
Well, it's Alvin Cohen. It's the former trustee of the museum. He was friends with the diamond dealers that sponsored Konovalenko, and they arranged for them to end up here. But it's a good question. Why Denver? Well, history. So, sorry.
Thank you very much, Steve. I've got a couple of gifts for you. Can you hear? Yeah, that's good. First of all, we have a fundraiser each year and also a fundraiser that we call the Branch Rickey Award. And as you know, the movie out now on 42, Branch Rickey Integrated Professional Baseball. This is a baseball signed by our most recent winner.
Wow. Oh, very nice. Thank you so much.
I'll stand here for a minute, too. We also are 100 years old. Rotary Club of Denver. This is our history, our shot at it book.
Very nice.
So, thank you. I would suggest that you all go and look at his notes. They're on the website of the museum, and you saw the energy in the presentation today, and you can see where that energy comes from. He embraces life like very few scientists I've seen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. One other tidbit. We got a story on national NPR. I got to hang out with Corey Flintoff of NPR for a day. He had coffee in my room, and I am a geek, but I like Corey Flintoff. That was cool. I will take you all. The exhibit is directly above us, just inside. So you go to the third floor, and then just inside, and it's on your left. I can meet you up there, and then I got to split off to a meeting. But please, if you don't see them today, go see them on another day, because of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, they're in ours. Okay? Thanks.
Homie? Isn't that fascinating? Oh, that's excellent. Oh. Wow.